definitely learn from it.
So if, typically when we pilot, you do things not as efficiently as you could the first time, and so instead of doing that in all the elementaries, and I think it would also give us an opportunity to look at interest in those other schools, or even schools that are outside of our system where people may be interested in coming here for the high ability. So I see it kind of as, really a test case, and I have the benefit of having been on this committee and hearing these discussions, but I had what Tracy brought up, I think, is a really good point. There's going to be people sort of like excited, like, oh, well, I want my kid to have this, and we don't want to be exclusive to any child in the system, but I think this using, and you said they would be able to transfer if they wanted, but I think knowing it's a pilot and that the goal is, if we can message that to the community and to parents, that the goal is to test it and figure out the bumps and what we can do and what works and what doesn't, and then the goal would be to serve our whole system, because every student in the system deserves to be taught in a way that they should be taught, regardless of where that is on an ability spectrum.
And I think we also evaluate with the number of kids, obviously what the optimal number is. Maybe it's just we have it at Lincoln and at Olytic or Parkview or at Shawswick, so it's only maybe the 3 that we do instead of every one of them. And yes, they might have to move, but I don't.
But it would be accessible, right?
It wouldn't be that much farther, because we have 2 here in town and 1 Olytic, and then Needmore. We wouldn't necessarily have to have one both at Needmore and Olytic,
right?
Or one at both Lincoln and Parkview. If we can. If we only had 15 in each, if Lincoln only ended up having, 10, and I just think we evaluate those numbers and see if we can kind of do it with 3 instead of 5 or something.
Well, and I think on the numbers, I hear what you're saying and completely agree. Shawswick at 38. I think what an elementary classroom is typically 28 students, which would be a teacher, right? It's an elementary classroom, 25 to 30. Okay.
Yeah, I would just advocate for, it looks like the other schools will all have access to the curriculum.
Yes.
And they have the same maybe time window.
Yes.
Maybe just not as much shepherding, mentoring through the curriculum as what Shawswick would have.
That's correct.
So
For now.
Right.
Whatever we can rip off and duplicate in a fast follower type of model to these schools, even next year during the year that it's happening, whether that's with reading specialists or whoever it is, we should do that and facilitate that curriculum at those other schools as much as we can.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's how the committee feels. The committee was very interested in providing this system-wide and not making any, because again, every student deserves the education that they should get, no matter what district they're in. In what school they're in within our district, and I think we do have to try this and then look at the outcomes from that. How did it work? And then really have almost like an operations type discussion about where could we afford this, and how do we make sure that it's all accessible to all our students.
And I think something else too, when or if we have this high ability specialist, she can help the other schools work with these curriculums and provide interventions and support. She'll have that specialized training.
Right now,
yes,
right.
Absolutely. That is part of, that's why I put that on there. I will lean on her to help me with that.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Miller? Okay. Thank you so much. So, just to provide a little bit of context, the tag is teacher appreciation grants. We had a policy that we have a policy in place that is only for classroom teachers. Prior to this year, outside of we had been operating outside of the policy and giving any teacher the tag grant money. And this year, it's very important that we be in compliance with our policies for things like this. So the people who didn't meet those criteria did not get the tag money because they aren't eligible under the policy. So that's just to provide a context.
And we've talked about this multiple times, and a lot of those teachers that were mentioned, or those positions that were mentioned, they have an enhanced professional development program that helps compensate for that kind of thing, right? So it's not like they're being ignored and not being treated fairly. I mean, they have a different professional development program based upon their position that they have in the corporation. So, I mean,
So if we
I don't know why this would be necessary.
if we were to do this, if we were to change the policy, that money would not come from the education fund. It would come from tag, but it would lower the amount everybody gets. I see.
So that's what other corporations have done, or they take supplement money out of your education fund to pay those other teachers. Again, the state done a great job of,
Didn't or did?
I
Did
don't
not.
believe,
Okay.
telling schools exactly how. It was very broad, and schools across the state do this different. And
So it's our interpretation, but we have to, whatever our policy is, we have to follow.
yes. So when we looked at adding this, where it says employed on a teacher's contract, working with students, you have to work with students and you have to have a teacher's contract. So that includes your counselors, your reading specialists, and I think it was 11 or 12. There's no one from the association here, so I can't ask exactly.
And I know that Lacey has come and talked to us about this, about the teachers who didn't receive it, and if we were to back pay them, that would come from the education fund, and that would be how much ish?
20,000.
About 20,000.
But next year, if we adopt this policy, we would only take down the tag grant that comes from the state. And you still have to be effective and highly effective. So
So is
this,
this a recommendation from the association?
the association,
Okay.
so they'll draft it. So we would have to start the first reading, 20th at our board meeting, and then we'd have to have a second reading in July for it to be
Okay.
enacted policy.
But we need to determine if we want to, I mean, I think that's why we're here to discuss, if we want to entertain changing this.
And then if you do, or like me pick it up, I would call the company, Neola, and I'll have it changed, so it's officially put in through the city in writing.
So how much would this, by adding those teachers, how much would that decrease the amount that
That's not a whole lot.
everybody gets? Okay, so, okay.
It's a very small grant in the scheme of things, as many teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What are those numbers? Do you know?
I don't know, was it $250 they got? It wasn't like it was.
For highly effective, it was 250. I think that's right.
I believe those other positions are taken care of in other means, and we don't really need to modify this policy.
So do you want me to go ahead and write it up and then we vote on it? Because it'll have to be voted on twice, two readings, so we'll have to have.
Unless we feel like we need further information or further discussion. I mean, well, if we write it up, we can.
I'm not ready to write it up. I can write it up and bring it to the next meeting, and that would be in 2 weeks.
And it would be for a vote, or just for the,
That's the first reading.
Right, that's the
Then
first reading.
Second reading, then the vote.
okay.
So,
What,
How-
when
how
you
does
say
everybody
people
feel?
they're taken care of in other means, Scott, what do you reference?
Not under equivalent. No, this grant is meant for teachers that are in the classroom. That's what it was meant for, and that's what it should be for. That's why they call it, well, anyhow. So there were some that are on the list that we got, and there was a discussion, we discussed it in a couple meetings. And like instructional coaches, they have a different professional development program than like a teacher would have or a counselor would have. And those teachers that were on that list that didn't get the tag have a more robust professional development program. So that kind of compensates for those positions as opposed to this tag grant.
Professional development in incentive and award, or professional development in terms of training?
In terms of what the package that they get for training and
They get,
development, right? So it's more robust than a teacher would
I
get.
think they have more professional development funds and opportunities than a classroom teacher.
Many of them have different days as of the contract too.
So that, having tags, it might be people in the classroom,
Okay. I was interpreting the tag. I thought the tag was take home in pocket pay.
It is.
It is.
one time.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I think why it exists was to incentivize people to teach in the classroom?
Yes.
So I think that's,
And high ability,
okay.
not highly effective evaluations too.
Right. So I think that's where the grant came from. That's why it exists, is to incentivize those teachers to stay in the classroom. But what many systems have done is separated it to all teachers, even those outside of the classroom. And I think when we sort of discovered that that's what we had been doing, and it was at odds with our written policy, so we didn't do it this year. I think that's why the association was asking if, number one, if we would be willing to back pay the ones who didn't get it out of the education fund at $20,000 and change the wording going forward so that wouldn't happen again.
And we wouldn't be taking out the education fund because it's all funded by the state.
And this wouldn't cover others who work with students who are
Yep.
not on a teacher's contract. right?
Correct.
So we have a lot of other employees who work with students equally that would not be covered because they don't have a teacher contract or professional development.
I still don't think I follow the line of thinking of your professional development comment where the tag is an incentive pay, it goes home with the teacher,
Yes.
personal pay. You're citing that others, counselors, reading specialists, get access to professional development, but that's not the same thing as take-home pay.
No, I think he's saying like their package is better already. Is that what you're saying?
They're already compensated for working with students.
So for,
Higher general pay.
yes, so the ones
Okay.
who,
Compensated for working with students.
Okay.
This is for teachers in the classroom. Be compensated based on this grant.
so if the teachers in the classroom, this is my line of thinking, there's a potential for the teachers in the classroom to feel like, oh, well, I'm staying in the classroom, but if I were outside the classroom, I'd still get that
I see.
it's a small incentive.
I see. Okay. Thank you for clarification.
Do we need to decide right now about writing it up?
You can tell me later.
Okay. And what about there was a question about, I know that the president of the association, Mrs. Hawkins, has asked me about back paying the $20,000, and so I think that's something that the board needs to discuss, if that's something that we want to do or not.
I can't do that without the board approval.
Oh, right, no, that's something that we have to, I know you can't. No, we have to determine that, so is that something we would discuss in executive, or would it need to be here?
Can, but, again, I think you would want to change your policy.
I know, but,
Because if we don't change the policy, I'm afraid if we go ahead and do
right,
back pay to the education.
yes,
fund,
and I
we're not
understand that,
setting
I'm making sure that what she brought as the association president is heard in this forum, okay.
Could we, my request would be to see this issue, the discussion we've had, kind of in writing. I mean, I see a very brief sentence on a proposed change, or not even proposed change yet,
Mhm.
but a conceived change. But I don't know how
You
many.
want to see the number.
The numbers, how many teachers are we talking about who, or people who weren't eligible this year who had
Who
been
would be
previously?
eligible?
Okay.
Mhm.
How big is that grant base? How many people are you dividing it by? What other compensation, like Scott talked about, that they already get a 15% higher average salary depending on what their position
Yeah,
is?
we can present that to the board.
That would be helpful, and just I don't know, I feel like this was a Band-Aid type issue where this one time it hurt because it was unannounced, I think, or not
Well,
planned
it
out.
was. It wasn't that it was unannounced. It was that
Property announced.
it once it was discovered, there was a practice that was outside of the policy happening, and when it was discovered by our central administration, they corrected it, which is the appropriate action in my view. It's unfortunate that the teachers who were counting on it didn't know until we discovered it, but
Right.
it wasn't intentionally withheld. It was it was a malpractice on the system's part. It's not a tremendous amount of money, but we have to be, I know I say it over and over again, but we have to be very, very walk the line with our
Right.
policies, particularly when it comes to funding. So I don't think that it was announced late. I think it's just that's when we discovered, oh, this is a mistake. We have to fix it. Is that accurate?
So I would,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
so I'll go ahead and get the information that Adam wants, and we'll
Mhm.
get that to the board.
Okay.
All right.
Any
Do
other
you
discussion?
do you want to take time and talk about the theater right
Yes,
now? The theater
and
teacher
I
is
can.
here.
Yes, and Mr. Hayden Perez is here, and since we tabled it, I kind of took it upon myself to. I talked with him. I got a copy of the script for the musical that they are wanting to perform, and so it is on the agenda tonight since it was tabled to be voted this evening. So I was just going to allow us to have any discussion that we wanted to have. Mr. Hayden Perez is here to answer any questions. I did not ask him to present anything, but if there's anything you want to say, you're welcome to, or the board can ask you questions or decide amongst ourselves. What we're voting on later this evening is the camp that I think it's June 17th. Okay, through the 30th. And then the performances are the end of June. So, I would welcome is there anything that you want to say, or you want us just to discuss and ask questions? You're welcome to come up and present anything you'd like. But I didn't want you to feel like you had to.
Hello, everyone. I'm not planning on doing a whole presentation for you, but I do have some notes and things if you'd like to hear it. But I'm also more than willing to just answer some questions and let you do your process.
Why don't you go ahead and that'll get us started.
Okay.
Because our process will happen regardless.
Perfect. So thank you all for the opportunity to come and speak. I really appreciate it. I would have been here on the 17th, but I was in the Little Theater's production of Fiddler on the Roof, so I was a little busy at the time of the meeting. And thank you to Dr. Wendy Miller for kind of taking the lead and helping with this. For context, this is a show. First off, this is the high school version of a show. This is not the original version of the show. The original version of the show is very much not an appropriate show, and I wouldn't consider ever seriously putting on that show in any way that reflected its original state. The rights, I sought permission from both my department chair and from my building principal, and I received both those permissions multiple times. And so I have received the rights to the show, and I was always upfront about things that might be an issue. There was always time for, those people to step in and maybe suggest something different. But I also believe that this show reflects what our students are feeling, and these are all roles that are appropriate for them and reflect their lived experiences. This was in fact a show that was brought to me by my students. I didn't seek this show out. They brought it to me. It was apparently a whole thing on TikTok.
Yeah,
And
it is.
Yeah, and so I watch. I'm like, this is a great show. Lots of issues. Could never do it. It's not a possibility. And later on, earlier in 2024, in February, the high school version of this show was made available to purchase the rights for K-12 organizations. And I looked through the script, and there are substantial changes from the original, and it takes out a lot of the very questionable elements. And I personally think that much of the show is completely unobjectionable, if even a little sanitized at times. We have already started working on props, on costumes. Even yesterday, a whole bunch of kids were working to help make the auditorium all ready for it, focusing lights, stuff like that. And we've already started beginning the plannings for the camp. I think that this is a great show because the characters are very much on their level. They're all flawed. They are not perfect characters, and they're all dealing with very adolescent issues. And one of the big selling points with this camp is that every student who comes and does it gets a role in the show. And that's something that I'm very proud of. It's a small show, so I can cast the show multiple times over. And, there's varying roles for varying abilities. There are acting heavy roles. There are singing heavy roles. There's a role for everybody in this show. And that's one of the things that I personally really love about it. And again, these characters are dealing with adolescent problems, a lack of belonging, a discomfort with their identity, and meeting the expectations of people around them. These are all things that students deal with every day in our buildings. And this is a way for them to experience that in a slightly fantastical way. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. That's why I believe in this show. And I really want to provide this opportunity for students to work on their dramatic skills and to receive further enrichment in the theatrical arts through this camp.
Okay, thank you. And this will be performed at Schaefer.
Correct,
That's
due to
plan because of the chiller at the
exactly.
PAC. Okay, I just wanted to. Okay, so I would open it up for questioning or discussion to Mr. Hayden Perez.
All right. I don't have any questions right now, but I have some comments. So
Yeah.
First of all, I wouldn't necessarily consider TikTok a great source for high school students.
Yes.
Well, that's they're on it, whether we want them to.
I understand,
Yes.
but that's still not good, whether they're on it or not. They do a lot of things that probably shouldn't do. So in your rationale, it says a great opportunity for students interested in theater developing their skill sets, carrying momentum from Legally Blonde. So if that's your rationale, then I think you could have easily selected a better choice. So it says the original show was very rough around the edges. I think that's an understatement. It's extremely rough. And it says the high school edition, they've done a lot to tame it.
Yeah.
Not to tame it completely, I believe, for our high school in this community. You said nearly all the explicit language had been removed. And then the biggest song, the main song, has been rewritten to make it work in high school.
Correct.
But I just like to read some of I got the script and I like to read just some of the stuff that's in the script that I think is inappropriate for B&L. All right? And I'm not making any judgments on anybody or anything. I'm just saying for this high school and this community, I think some of these things are very inappropriate. And I'm opposed to doing this. But character Jane, she says, when a lioness has children, she stops making love to the lion. The lion gets jealous, sometimes so jealous he eats the children. You think this would upset the lioness? Far from it. They make love again like the children never existed. Then we have a main character, Noel, and it says, meet Noel Gruber. It said, being the only gay man in a small rural high school is kind of like having your sweet 16 on the moon. And later there's a reference, says, Noel, I love you. This is from Miska. You challenge my perceived notion that all gay dudes are fun to be around. And then when we get to his song that's mentioned, Noel's Lament, so he alters his clothing, puts on a wig, and transforms into an archetypical French woman. Beret, striped shirt, pleated skirt. And then again later on, after his song is done, we get further in, it says, well, I like the part about the two boys danced. In my country, it's natural for two men to show affection by dancing, but not always with a pleated skirt. And then later in the show, there's a song by a character called Ricky. So they took me then to their daughter's realm, the land of Kitty Cat Star. I know you've heard the legends of the funky cat woman from Zolar. What would you do in my place, a mere mortal man? The dancing daughters of the realm, all chasing after me. You'd never guess the role I played in Zolarian history. And if we take a deeper look at Noel's Lament, this song that was completely written for high school, and it's the longest song in it, right? It's probably the centerpiece. In his character, I guess, other than Ocean, it's one of the centerpieces. So it starts out saying, my life, I was Noel Gruber, who worked at Taco Bell in Uranium City, Saskatchewan. But in my dreams, I played a different role. I was Monique Gabot from France, a traveling, dangerous woman, entertaining the crowds by day and swindling by night. And this is all part of the song. I want to be a broken woman, broken heart, a life of sin, tattooed with a safety pin, racketeering, bribery, extortion, fraud and forgery, super crusty, holo terror, wide-eyed, and bad mascara. Jean-Jacques, a juggler with a nasty streak, last fool who crossed us, faded quickly to black. I have no idea where to find him, officers, but if you do, please mention that. We'd like to have returned the pretty knife that we stuck 10 times in his back. And a recurring chorus of this is, for I sing songs until the break of dawn. I commit a new crime every night. My life's a never-ending carnival. And then there's, I think it's in Song 14 from Mishka. It says, roll to the club where the rich kids go, the sweet little honeys all checking my flow, all kinds of hotties from all around the world. But I feel this pair of eyes and I see this girl, my divine Talia. When I look into your almond eyes, I do not see a boy I am, but the man I must become to possess you. I want to take all the pain from your soul and then the passion factory of my heart, transform it into functional joy. And when we sing and dance and drink, then I will whisper in your ear, let rivers run or let them be damned. My perfect Talia, I lay my masculinity at the altar of your maidenhood. I don't really see these as age appropriate for this high school and this community. I think this was a poor choice. Some people had opportunities to stop it and should have. And I don't think as a corporation we should promote this in our schools.
I would just reiterate that this was approved by is Mr. Canada here? I thought he was coming.
I think the fact that he approved it really isn't relevant. I think it's more of a mistake than relevance. I mean, it's not reflected on him.
Well, I'm just saying that he didn't go rogue, is what I'm trying to.
I understand.
make
I'm not
that
blaming
clear.
him. All I'm saying is I don't think this is
Oh, I'm not
appropriate.
right. I see what you're saying. I'm not saying the fact that it's already been approved. Yeah.
I would blame Mr. Canada since he approved it, but I'm not blaming this gentleman here. I think it was a poor choice, but he did go through the proper channels. But I think his judgment was a little skewed. But I just, based on just the brief time I've looked through it, and I didn't go through every single song in detail, but that enough to me says this is not appropriate for our high school kids at BNL in Lawrence County. So I don't think we should pursue it any further.
Any other questions from the board or discussion? I mean, we're going to vote on it, but this is our opportunity to. I mean, we're not voting on it in this session. This is our opportunity to discuss anything else or to ask Mr. Hayden Perez questions.
Not a question for Mr. Hayden, maybe a question for Mr. Yancey. This is not a matter of course that the content of a musical or content of a curriculum, shouldn't say that, content of a musical or play would come before the board. Is that correct?
It's past practice in other districts. I've worked at plays or any type of sporting camps do not come in front of the board.
I don't think we've ever voted on a show or a.
There was, and it's been.
I mean, not in my time anyway. Yeah.
I can't even remember which. I think it was Greece, honestly. There was some discussion about that, and that's been at least a decade ago, and then we ended up doing it at a later date. I mean, it wasn't, the board at that time didn't like it. then it was brought later, you know.
Yeah, I think we've done
eight
it
or
more
9
than
years
once,
later, and
yeah.
then did it, so.
But it was on the agenda last month, so
Yes,
it was brought
yes.
to
It
the
was
board.
It
brought to the
was.
agenda, but that seemed like
Whether it's
an
supposed to or
anomaly
not.
to me. Yeah.
It was, and so that's why we're
The content of the musical is not dependent upon it being brought to the board. I'm questioning the content of the musical.
Right.
And I don't think we should do it. And it doesn't matter who approved it, who brought it to the board. I still think
It was presented to
I still
you,
think
so,
it's
yeah.
inappropriate for us to do, since it was brought to the board and we took a look at it.
So Mr.
I'm glad we had a
Perez,
chance to.
you mentioned that it's relevant to the students.
Correct.
So tell me about that. I mean, how do you see this type of musical with this content, and really all I've seen is what he said, and so how does this help them? How does this encourage them? How does this, we live in a conservative community. I mean, we just do. And there's going to be some people that are going to never hear anything about this whatsoever, but now it's been brought to light
Yes.
for us, and so now it's going to become a issue. And people are going to take sides, good and bad. It's just the way the community is. How do you, as the adult in this situation, as the expert, how do you perceive this having an effect on our youth?
So I think one of the things we need to pay attention to is the overall arc of the musical, right? All of these things that were presented are not necessarily presented positively throughout the show. So what this does is this presents windows and mirrors for our students to explore different facets of their own social emotional well-being. And by focusing on these dramatic situations where not every character can be positive, not every character can be squeaky clean, it lets us cathartically work through those. So from my notes, again, I think every kid, and I would hate this to be controversial, I think every student, especially those that are in my program that are in theater, sometimes feel a lack of belonging, whether that is, within the school, within their own families, wherever that might be. They find that belonging through my theater. And that is what these people are dealing with in this play. They have lived their entire lives, and all of them are dissatisfied with some dumb adolescent thing. And the overall narrative is resolving those tensions, resolving those issues to become more full and well-rounded and positive people. You have the one girl who's been told her entire life that she should hate where she's from. And in the end, she decides that no, she doesn't. She loved her life. She loved being part of her family and being a part of that small town. And that's her overriding arc. Or you have Ocean, who's been so filled with these expectations of others that she fails to be a good friend, to be a good person. And that's what she learns throughout this show. Noel and his lament, this idea of him being this nihilistic French person in post-war Paris or whatever, is his seeking to reconcile the displacement that he feels. He feels that by escaping into this different life that he can be more truly himself. And that, at the end of the day, is theater, right? It's an assessment of the human condition, and it's finding these different ways of being that help us be more truly ourselves.
Thank you.
As a sports nerd, I don't understand the theater nerds.
well, you've got one right here.
Yeah, and a lot of our community is not theater nerds.
Yes.
So, this one worries me. I took a lot of abuse from my old neighbor ladies over Legally Blonde, and I think this one is a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, even at the Little Theater, which I've been on the board for, any show that you do, there are some people. If it's a reflection of reality, there are things people like and don't like. I mean,
But those are adults.
But even years ago when my daughter was in theater, we did Anything Goes. We've done some of these other things that I think there were the same. I wasn't on the board then, so I don't know if there were conversations on the board, but definitely there were people who had issues with different, or we did Adam's Family, the high school version of Adam's Family. Some people thought that was too dark. So I do think there are in our community there and in any community probably that there will be those questions about. And I'm not saying that to diminish what you're feeling, but like I think what I'm saying is I think you're correct. There will be that.
And if I may piggyback on that, this is a tuition-based camp. The reason it's a tuition-based camp is because who in their right mind has ever heard of Ride the Cyclone? You know, it's a tuition-based camp, so I'm on some level, the attendance does not matter. You know, I am not expecting people that come to Legally Blonde or The Sound of Music or High School Musical to come to Ride the Cyclone. It is an entirely different scale of a production. It is an entirely different scale of advertisement. And while, you know, responding is a very important part of the theatrical process, I cannot control what people choose to feel about it. But I also know that most people are not going to come to this show in the first place.
I'm a little more concerned about the students than I am the audience. And I think if we approve this, and we're basically promoting what it's doing. So,
Any other discussion, questions?
I will say, by and large, I do not want, as a board member, to be the content police on our performance arts, our literature. I think the staff do need to use good sense, and I know that's probably a blurred line in some places. But I mean, my daughter read Romeo and Juliet this spring in one of her English classes. You know, full of murder, suicide, illicit affairs, you name it. I don't know that this is going to, you know, evoke the same classics that Shakespeare does, but I don't want to spend an enormous amount of the board's time policing content in general. And I don't think that this is a role the board should take on regularly. Now, I'm sure there are instances where we are also the sounding board and feedback mechanism for the public. So if you grossly violate your abilities to put on productions or pass out literature that is grossly opposed to this town's norm, then you're definitely going to hear about it. And so do that at your peril, I would say.
All right, anybody have anything else to discuss about this? All right, thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Perez. And I think that concludes the work session. Let's take just a bathroom. 3 minutes will get us to